You ever have one of those days where someone seriously underestimates you? That's exactly what happened when the HOA sent an inspector to my door, clipboard in hand, attitude turned all the way up. He said he was there to check for violations, overgrown bushes, a mailbox that was a half-inch too tall, the usual HOA nonsense. But he didn't know one very important detail about me. I'm with internal affairs. I kept it cool. Let him do his thing. I've seen this before. People flashing authority like a badge to push others around. He was clearly expecting me to just roll over, maybe even try to bribe my way out of a fine. Instead, I quietly watched as he overstepped again and again. What he didn't realize was that I wasn't just some clueless homeowner. I was taking notes too, and the deeper I looked, the uglier things got. Turns out, this wasn't just about my lawn or mailbox. It was about a pattern of power tripping, intimidation, and crossing the line one too many times. And that clipboard he carried, it didn't protect him when the real badges showed up. He came to find me. He left in handcuffs. But that's just where it starts. What I found next in the HOA records. That's when things got really interesting. So after the inspector was taken away, I couldn't let it go. Something about the whole situation felt off, like he wasn't acting alone. The way he showed up unannounced, already talking about fines before even looking around, and the smug attitude. It felt rehearsed, like he'd done this 100 times before. And when I mentioned I was with internal affairs, he flinched, just for a second, but I caught it. That's when I knew there was more. I decided to dig into the HOA's records, not as a homeowner, but as someone who knows how to follow a paper trail. At first, it was just small things: duplicate fines on random properties, vague violation notices with no photo evidence, late fee charges that never added up. But then I found something bigger. A pattern. Certain residents were being targeted over and over, mostly the ones who either asked too many questions or didn't attend HOA meetings. I even recognized one name, Mrs. Talbot, sweet older lady a few houses down. She got fined 4 times in 2 months for things that didn't make sense. A no-curtain uniformity fine. Seriously. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about keeping the neighborhood nice. It was about control, and someone at the top was pulling all the strings. I started talking to neighbors, quietly. Not everyone was willing to open up at first, but once I mentioned the inspector getting arrested, a few eyebrows went up. That's when the stories started coming out. People have been fined for ridiculous things. A kid's bike left on the lawn for one afternoon, garden lights not HOA approved, even a wreath on a front door being too large. But when they complained or asked for documentation, they were met with silence, or worse, threats of more fines. One guy, Marcus, told me he'd tried to run for a position on the HOA board last year. A few days later, he got hit with 3 violations in a single week, and then his application mysteriously disappeared. It was like the board didn't just enforce the rules, they controlled who even had a voice. And guess who signed off on most of those citations? The same inspector who left in cuffs. What really made things weird was when I got a letter. No return address, just a single sheet of paper inside. Stop digging. You don't know who you're messing with. No name, no signature. But now I knew I was on the right path. This wasn't just about power-hungry HOA board members. This was starting to look like corruption on a whole different level. And someone was watching me. After that anonymous letter showed up, things started getting strange, paranoid strange. I'd come home and find my gate unlatched, lights on that I was sure I'd turned off, even a tire on my car mysteriously flat one morning. At first, I thought maybe I was just being too suspicious. But then Marcus called me, panicked. Someone had broken into his shed, nothing stolen, but his HOA documents, all the letters and fines he'd saved, were gone. Just like that. I knew I had to act fast. I started making digital copies of everything: emails, notices, meeting transcripts I'd pulled from archive minutes. I backed them up in 3 different places, because if they were trying to silence people, I needed to make sure they couldn't erase the truth. I dug into the HOA board members, one by one. And that's when I found the link. The president of the board, a guy named Harold Finch, had a quiet little business registered in another state, Property Management Services. Guess who his biggest client was? Our HOA. He'd basically set up a system where he could approve work, write contracts, and funnel HOA funds right back into his own pocket. And the inspector, just one of many on his personal payroll. But I still needed proof, solid proof. So I went to the next HOA meeting, hidden recorder in my pocket, ready to confront them. That night, though, someone else showed up first. And what happened in that room? It changed everything. The HOA meeting that night was packed, more people than usual, probably because word had spread about the inspector incident. I took a seat in the back, keeping a low profile. I had the recorder running in my jacket pocket and a copy of my findings tucked in a folder under my arm. My plan was simple: wait for the right moment, then bring everything out into the open. But before I could say a word, a woman I'd never seen before stood up. She wasn't on the board, wasn't on any committee. She introduced herself as Laura, and then she dropped a bombshell. She used to work for Harold Finch. Not in real estate, she was his assistant at a private consulting firm, years before he ever joined the HOA. She claimed Harold had done this before, in 2 other neighborhoods. Set up fake fines, used HOA funds for personal projects, and when things got too hot, he bailed and started over somewhere new. The room went dead silent. You could feel the tension, like everyone just realized this went way deeper than anyone thought. Laura pulled out a flash drive and said, "I kept records. I always do." That's when Harold stood up, red in the face, and called for an immediate end to the meeting. But before anyone moved, someone else walked in. 2 men, badges out, and they weren't from the local department. The 2 men walked straight to the front of the room, flashing federal badges. The whole place froze. One of them calmly said, "Harold Finch, you're under investigation for wire fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. We have a warrant." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Harold tried to protest, but his voice cracked. The second agent pulled out handcuffs, while the first retrieved the flash drive from Laura, thanking her like this had been planned for weeks. It was intense. People were whispering, some recording on their phones. And just like that, Harold Finch, the man who ran the HOA like his personal empire, was being walked out the same way the inspector had been. Only this time, the board had no one to hide behind. The room erupted. Some were angry, some relieved, but mostly everyone wanted answers. After Harold was taken away, the agents stayed behind and asked me to share what I'd found too. They already had some of the same documents. Turns out, my little investigation had crossed paths with theirs. They'd been tracking similar HOA scams in other states, and this was their breakthrough. But just when I thought it was all over, Laura pulled me aside. Quietly, she said, "Harold wasn't working alone. There's someone higher up, and they already know your name." After Harold was taken away, the agents stayed behind and asked me to share what I found too. They already had some of the same documents. Turns out, my little investigation had crossed paths with theirs. They'd been tracking similar HOA scams in other states, and this was their breakthrough. But just when I thought it was all over, Laura pulled me aside. Quietly, she said, "Harold wasn't working alone. There's someone higher up, and they already know your name." That's when I realized this wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. After that night, everything changed. The HOA board was temporarily dissolved, and a special election was held to rebuild it from scratch. A lot of us in the neighborhood finally felt like we had a voice again. I helped oversee the transition, not just as a homeowner, but as someone who'd seen what unchecked power could do. Laura testified in the investigation, and thanks to her flash drive and the files I'd gathered, Harold's case moved fast. He ended up pleading guilty to multiple charges, including HOA fraud and misuse of funds. As for that someone higher up, Laura warned me about. Federal agents are still working on it. They wouldn't tell me much. But they did say this scheme reached across several states, and our neighborhood was just one piece of a bigger puzzle. That part of the story, it's still unfolding. Marcus ran for the new board and won, Mrs. Talbot. Her fines were wiped clean, and she got an apology letter from the interim HOA rep. We even threw a block party, first one in years. The biggest lesson: never assume the person at your door knows more than you. And sometimes the best way to deal with entitled people is to know your rights, keep your records, and stay 2 steps ahead. Because the truth, it always finds a way out.